And the first one is you were talking about Van Halen. I absolutely love the guitar tones you achieved when working with Van Halen. Could you share a bit about how those sounds were created?
And you just asked about that. Like with Eddie, um, most all Van Halen records are not double tracked because
Hmm.
he would play the part with all these nuances and squeals and all the, and for him to have to double that, you, not even just him, but guitar players, when they know they're going to double the guitar, simplify their part because they don't have to worry about learning every little personality nuance to have to double that because that's incredibly time consuming. And why, if you're doubling it, do you want to sort of make it sound that way, where you can't, because human beings, it's almost impossible to be perfect. So if this guitar is like perfect on its own, but you try to double it, you can hear all the imperfections then, where on its own, it's perfect, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
Um, so the thing I did with Ed that was, I know that you don't come into a Van Halen record and tell Eddie, well, here, this is how we're going to do it. So you come in, to Ed's world and you see what he's doing. And he wasn't using ribbons. He was using one cabinet. He'd have two 57s and he'd split them and he would delay them a little differently. So they were doing this more electronic bounce,
Hmm.
but it was not a dedicated analog bounce of stereo left and right. So I came in and we talked about it and I said, you've got this splitter here that you use for live. Do you want to try messing around with something that I do sometimes? And at the time, he was also designing a new head. He had a 50 watt, he had the 100 watt, he had the Mark II. You know, he's like, yeah, man, whatever. And so we started by just using two heads and two cabinets with the 57s, not an extra mic yet. And he already started to like that because that's like a natural stereo, because speakers don't move absolutely perfectly. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So the left and right speakers are just doing this little dance, which creates this little stereo air dance. It still sums to mono. It still comes out of the center, in its own way because it's one source, but it's one source into a splitter that's going into two heads. And I said, well, now you can, or you have all these different choices, because he had his like guitar and amp locker down, we're up at 5150, so it's on his own property. He has all his gear is in in a vault, in a like a air conditioned vault. And I said, why, just for me, can we pull out the old Marshall and can we pull out some of your old gear and start messing around? And so we started to do that, and we started to have a really good time with like blending two amps. And I said, I got one thing I want to do now. I said, because right now you've got this API on both 57s where you're lopping on like a shit gob of 50 cycles to add low end, because 57s don't have any bottom, and he's looking for bottom. I said, I got this microphone that we're working on with this company, Royer. It's a tube ribbon mic. At the time, it was called. It became the 122V, and the 122V is basically like a 121 or a 122, except it's tube. And so it's got a lot of detail, a lot of bottom, a lot of full range. It's really a killer microphone. So I said, I'm going to put these up. I want you to check them out and just play. We'll record them on separate tracks. So you'll have your 57s. Now you'll have your Royers. I can put them right in phase, perfectly in phase, where the ribbon and the capsule, they'll be as in phase as I can get them. And you can just play with them, and we'll take all the EQ off the 57s. And when you want more low end, Ed, God rest his soul, was a great engineer. He just amazingly intuitive and an incredible engineer on his own. And so he just sat there and would listen back, and he'd just turn the Royers up and down. And I would watch him as he turned the Royers up. He would start to really get off because the Royers are bringing in natural low end, not EQ'd low end to a microphone that doesn't have it. So it's a natural low end. It's not like a 50 cycle filter hump on an API. It's a mic that's capturing the low end that's at the speaker and also bringing in a whole nother frequency response that is the mid range too, killer low mids that start to make the guitar really speak. Mm-hmm. And he totally understood it within like 5 minutes of sitting there. He was like, yeah, man, fuck yeah. So we got rid of the EQ off the 57s, and it just became a balance between the Royer and the 57, which is what I was doing and still do. You know what I mean? It wasn't anything, but to watch Ed see that, and then we would pick, and we would do this thing where, like, to pick the blend of the left and right amps was also really fun because, we would get like a left side amp that he was really happy with, but it may not be blending with the right side amp. And so we would change that until that sound was something. And we would do this on our own time, because you're not trying to turn it, but it's his own studio. And we got this, and it's like, and some days we would just record a DI and feed it back and play around with it that way. So we could just keep changing shit until he was like, that's fucking awesome. And, so there were things that we did that made those guitar sounds special because he wanted something, he wanted to make space for Wolf's bass too. Like with Wolf's bass, we had it's a much grindier bass sound than on prior records because Wolf comes from more like 90s and 2000s alternative music bass sound, So one of the things I did do was just move the guitars a little wider by just using time adjuster. Because if you take the time adjuster off, they're mostly in the center. So you could put a little time adjustment of basically like a delay, but within samples, and just move them out just a little bit. They're not out of phase or anything because they're perfectly in phase. They just move a little wider to create more center space.
To watch the full video, click the link below and don't forget to subscribe.